Okay, are you ready for this? Today, we're taking a deep dive into, well, mold. Not exactly the most glamorous topic, right? You don't usually see it featured on those trendy home makeover shows.
Right. But you might be surprised by how much there is to learn about this everyday intruder.
Seriously, mold. What's the big deal? Just spray some bleach and move on, right?
Oh, if only it were that simple. Mold is way more complex than most people realize. It's not just about aesthetics, it impacts our health, our homes, even our social systems in ways we often overlook. We're talking building design, respiratory health, even social equity. Mold touches it all.
Okay, you've definitely piqued my curiosity. Let's break it down, starting with the basics. Whenever we hear about mold, it's always black mold, black mold. It's like the villain of the mold world. So, is it really that much worse than other types of mold?
Well, first, we need to clarify something. Black mold isn't one specific thing, it's kind of an umbrella term. Often when people say black mold, they're referring to Stachybotrys chartarum. Yeah. And yeah, this one's a bit of a troublemaker. It produces some particularly nasty mycotoxins.
Mycotoxins, those don't sound good. What exactly do those do to our bodies?
Let's just say they're not your friends. Mycotoxins are chemicals, and some of them can wreak havoc on a cellular level. We're talking messing with your immune system, targeting your respiratory system. And one type, called ochratoxin A, is even classified as a potential carcinogen. We're talking serious stuff here.
Okay, now I'm officially creeped out. But are you saying that we should only be worried about black mold? What about all the other types of mold out there? Are they just harmless roommates?
Not so fast. Focusing solely on black mold gives people a false sense of security. There are plenty of other molds that can cause problems. Take Aspergillus niger, for example. It's not black, but it's a major culprit in food spoilage and can wreak havoc if you inhale too much of it.
So it's like the quiet troublemaker of the mold world, lurking in the shadows, causing problems when you least expect it.
Exactly. It's important to remember that mold, regardless of its color, can pose risks to our health and well-being. It's not about the color, it's about understanding the specific types of mold and their potential effects.
All right, so we've established that mold is more than just an aesthetic nuisance. But let's dive into the specifics of how it impacts our health. We all know about allergies, but what else are we talking about here?
Well, one of the most significant concerns is respiratory health, and this is where things get really interesting. We're talking about a clear link between mold exposure, damp living conditions, and a higher risk of issues like asthma and decreased lung function.
Okay, so that makes sense. Mold, dampness, breathing problems, it all seems to add up. But here's where things take a surprising turn. I've heard that women are actually more affected by mold than men. Is there any truth to that?
It's not quite as simple as saying women are inherently more susceptible to mold. But there's compelling research showing that women often experience more severe health impacts from mold, particularly when it comes to respiratory issues.
Hold on. That's huge. Why is that? Are we talking about certain types of mold that specifically target women? What's the deal here?
It's not about the mold itself being gender biased. It's more nuanced than that. Research has shown that women exposed to mold in their homes experience faster lung function decline and report more severe respiratory symptoms compared to men living in similar conditions.
So if it's not the mold itself going after women specifically, then what's the missing link here? What's causing this disparity?
This is where social and environmental factors come into play, and it's a critical part of understanding mold's full impact. Let's dig into that.
Okay, you've got my attention. Social and environmental factors. How do those play into women being more affected by mold? It's not like mold is checking IDs at the door.
Right, it's not about mold having a preference, it's about exposure. Think about it. Who's more likely to end up in older housing, often riddled with dampness, and guess what? Mold. It's often women, especially in social housing situations. There was this study, I think it was back in 2019, by Moses that really highlighted this connection between housing quality and the people who are most affected.
So we're not talking about some inherent biological difference here. It's more like women are statistically more likely to be living in environments where mold is a bigger problem to begin with. That's kind of a game changer in how we view this whole thing.
Exactly. It's not just about individual health, it's about the environments we live in, the systemic issues that put certain groups at higher risk. We can't ignore that connection between mold, housing, and, let's be real, social equity.
It really makes you think twice about just reaching for the bleach and calling it a day, huh? So knowing all of this, knowing the health risks, the social complexities, the whole shebang, what can we actually do about it? Is this a big enough deal to be considered like a public health crisis?
It really is. Mold is a much bigger problem than many people realize, and yeah, it absolutely deserves to be treated as a serious public health concern.
Okay, so it's officially on our radar, but where do we even begin? We can't exactly wave a magic wand and make all the mold disappear, can we?
I wish it were that easy. But no, it's not about magic. It's about taking a multi-pronged approach. And one of the most effective things we can do is focus on prevention.
Prevention, always a good strategy. It's like they say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. But how do we prevent mold, especially on a larger scale?
That's where things like building practices come in. If we can design and construct buildings that are naturally resistant to moisture, well, we're basically cutting off mold at the source.
Okay, that makes sense. But how realistic is that? Are we talking about some futuristic, mold-proof material that hasn't even been invented yet?
It's not quite sci-fi, but there are some really innovative approaches out there. There was a study in 2009, I believe, by Vatanen that dug into the science of moisture-resistant building techniques, and it's fascinating stuff. Think vapor barriers, proper insulation, using materials that are naturally mold-resistant. These things can make a world of difference.
So it's about being smarter with how we build, not just slapping some walls up and hoping for the best.
Exactly. And it's not just about new construction either. Retrofitting older buildings with these kinds of moisture control measures can significantly reduce the risk of mold.
That's good news for those of us who aren't in the market for a brand new home. It's like, even if you got an old house with, some character, you can still take steps to make it less inviting for mold.
Precisely. And it all ties back to that idea of a multi-pronged approach. We need individual action, like you said, making those improvements in our own homes, but we also need larger scale initiatives. Imagine if building codes were updated to mandate these moisture-resistant techniques. That would be huge.
Talk about a game changer.
Yeah.
But what about those of us who, well, maybe aren't quite ready to start tearing down walls and installing vapor barriers? What can we do right now to make a difference?
Don't underestimate the power of simple things. We're talking ventilation, people. Running those bathroom fans, opening windows to get some airflow going, making sure your clothes dryer is vented properly. These little things can make a surprisingly big difference.
I'm guilty of forgetting to turn on the bathroom fan sometimes. It's like
Yeah.
out of sight, out of mind. But you're right, those small habits can add up.
Exactly. And beyond our individual efforts, we need to spread the word, raise awareness about mold and its impact.
Knowledge is power, right?
Right?
Arm people with information, and they can start making more informed decisions about their living environments.
100%. Public awareness campaigns can play a huge role here. Imagine seeing ads, social media posts, even community workshops, all geared toward teaching people about mold, how to spot it early on, and what to do if they find it.
I love that idea. It's like instead of just being grossed out by mold, we can actually understand it and take control. It's empowering.
Right. And it's not just about individual empowerment either. Public health agencies have a big role to play here too. They can advocate for policy changes that promote healthier indoor environments across the board.
So we're talking about a multi-layered approach, right? Individual action, public awareness, policy changes. It's all connected.
Absolutely. It's about creating a culture of prevention, a system that prioritizes healthy living environments for everyone.
That's a great way to put it. So we've covered prevention, we've talked about raising awareness, but there's one more piece of the puzzle we need to address, and it's a big one: insurance.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
Insurance. The I word that often sends shivers down homeowners' spines, especially when it comes to mold.
It seems like mold and insurance have a complicated relationship, to say the least. So before we wrap up this deep dive, let's unpack this insurance conundrum, shall we? All right, insurance. It's something most of us don't really want to think about, but when it comes to something like mold, well, it can become a pretty big deal, can it?
It sure can. And, it's often the thing that trips people up because they assume they're covered for mold damage, and then, bam, they get hit with a nasty surprise.
Yeah, that's the last thing you want when you're already dealing with a potential mold situation. So let's clear the air here. What is it about mold that makes it such a tricky issue for insurance companies?
Well, unlike some other types of damage, like, say, fire damage, there isn't a standardized system for assessing mold. It's not as simple as pointing to a charred wall and saying, see, fire damage.
So it's not as straightforward as, hey, I found some mold, you need to cover this.
Right. It's a lot more nuanced than that. With mold, there's always this question of what caused it? Was it a sudden event like a burst pipe, or was it a slow, gradual buildup over time?
So it becomes a bit of a detective case trying to pinpoint the origin story of the mold.
Exactly. And that's where things can get tricky for homeowners because if the insurance company can argue that the mold was due to, say, a long-standing maintenance issue that wasn't addressed, they might be reluctant to cover the damage.
That makes sense. It's like they want to see that you've taken reasonable steps to prevent the problem in the first place.
Exactly. And to add another layer of complexity, a lot of standard homeowners insurance policies either have very limited coverage for mold or they exclude it altogether.
Wait, seriously? So you could have mold in your home and your insurance might not cover it at all? That seems kind of crazy.
I know, right? It's a bit of a shock to a lot of people. That's why it's so important to, first and foremost, read your insurance policy very carefully. And I don't mean just skim it. I mean, really dissect the language, look for those mold-related clauses.
Sounds like it's time to break out the magnifying glass and get ready for some serious fine print analysis.
It's better to be safe than sorry. If you're not sure about something, don't hesitate to contact your insurance agent and ask for clarification.
So knowledge is power when it comes to insurance and mold, wouldn't you say?
100%. The more you know about your policy and what it covers, the better equipped you'll be to navigate these situations. And, if you find that your current coverage is lacking, talk to your agent about adding endorsements or riders that can provide more comprehensive protection.
So it's like insurance for your insurance. I like it.
Exactly. It's all about peace of mind. But, beyond individual homeowners taking those steps, there's also a bigger conversation happening about how we can address this issue of mold and insurance on a broader scale.
Oh, tell me more about that.
Well, there's a growing movement to establish standardized guidelines for assessing mold damage and handling mold-related insurance claims.
Standardized guidelines, it has a nice ring to it. What exactly would those look like?
Ideally, we're talking about a clear and consistent framework for determining things like, what caused the mold, how extensive is the damage, and what are the appropriate steps for remediation. This would help to eliminate a lot of the guesswork and create a more level playing field for both homeowners and insurance companies.
It sounds like it would make the whole process a lot smoother and less stressful for everyone involved.
Exactly. Less confusion, fewer disputes, and hopefully fairer outcomes.
Okay, so if those standardized guidelines become a reality, that would be a major win-win for everyone, right?
Absolutely. It's something that a lot of experts in the field are pushing for.
That's really encouraging to hear. So from microscopic spores to the complexities of the insurance world, we've covered a lot of ground today. It's amazing how something like mold can touch on so many aspects of our lives, isn't it?
It really is. It's one of those things that often flies under the radar until, well, it doesn't.
Exactly. But I think the key takeaway here is that knowledge is power. The more we understand about mold, how to prevent it, how to identify it, and yes, how to navigate the insurance maze, the better equipped we'll be to protect ourselves, our families, and our homes.
I couldn't agree more. It's all about being proactive and informed.
Well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up this episode of The Deep Dive. We hope you've enjoyed exploring the fascinating and, yes, sometimes a little bit icky world of mold. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay mold-free.